function. I call this function, and yeah, let's just give it a name. Cool project. And if I want to have something, yeah, but let's just try if that works. I mean, I like error-driven programming. Just try something and then run and then see what happens. Oh, so it's doing something. So what this did now, it created a virtual environment in the .tox folder, which is called Python because I didn't tell it to do anything else, so it just by default it creates a Python environment. And that's a virtual environment where I then can install my dependencies in and my testing framework and whatever. Because, I mean, any real project has some kind of third-party dependencies. And this is why I nowadays just start from the top down, basically. I don't start with Python code, I start with the thing around it because I'm going to need it anyway, so why not doing it right away? And if I want to have some code now, I could put that now in the root of the directory, but that would be boring. I want a package. That's also cool proj. And the package is nothing else but a directory that contains a dunder in it. Dunder is short for double underscore py, which can be empty, and that's the signal for Python that this is a package where I want my code in. So there I put my code now. That's my production code, that's how it's called. And we have a really cool function there, let's call it calc. Yeah, it's doing TensorFlow-based face recognition. Yeah, and we want a command line tool, so we need a main, definitely. And the main prints out then the result of the calculation, and nobody needs to know anything else but this, I would say. So, I just typed on the Mac OS the whole day, that shows.
Importing sys could help.
You think so? No. So, still doesn't change. Yeah, now we want to. I don't want it to work. So how can I test this code now? If I want to do this with Tox, first I didn't have to solve the problem anymore that I don't have a package. I could solve that though by saying skip sdist, and then I could even test code that doesn't have a package. So it's not even necessary to build that, but it's nicer. And we don't need a package, so we will still skip it. And now I create a test environment, development environment, and I want this to be installed in developing mode. That's the other important thing that I wanted to mention. And that's the difference then between having a hard life or a simple life while you're developing. Yeah.
Could you please switch to the light email?
Yeah, I was thinking that I might actually be better. Let's see. Is that better?
Yeah, way better.
Yeah, I usually work in the cellar and I don't use so much. Okay, so and this means, and let's do that in some random. So I'm in my project and I want to work on my project. So I want to install it, but in a mode that I can develop in it, which means I don't want the code be copied into the environment, which normally happens. It ends up in the side packages somewhere and the files are actually copied. I want to develop it where it is. So I say pip install -e, and then the path to the project which I'm in, so dot. And now if I say pip list, oh, there's a lot of other stuff in there now, but there will be, yeah. So here's my cool project version 000, and it is living in this folder. So this means it's installed as development version. And that's exactly the same that happens here if I set use develop to true. And no, I want to test it right away, directly first. So I just want to call it. So let's just call the code directly. So here I can enter a list of arbitrary commands. I can also ask which Python version is that first. So I can put anything in here. It's not a shell. It doesn't do wildcard expansion or something. I can also add a description for my fellow developers. Development environment at, and then I can also say where it is. That's called a substitution. These curly braces, then they get replaced. There are a handful of them where you have access to internal state. So let's try that out.
There was a typo in the Python command that you had in the file. The version.
Version, yeah. Yeah, so let's see if it's. So it should create a new environment that is called something bad happened, I think, just now. So there's a dev environment in there now. That's just another copy. And this is not defined. Oh, right after all, okay. But I mean, yeah, now I know what happened. I tested my code and it failed, so I wrote the first failing test-driven development. So let's fix that. And I could let PyCharm do that for me, but I don't. Now it works. So, and if I want to test that properly now, I add a folder called tests. And call that test underscore something for the production code. And create a function called test prod. And I assert on something that I expect. But I want it to fail first. What did I call it? Function cult. So, and now it's my first test. And if I want to run tests now instead of run this thing directly, I can say here I need PyTest, by the way, so I add that to my deps, which is also a list. I can add all kinds of packages there that I need for my testing needs. For example, Flake 8 also, to do linting. And then instead of running this thing directly here, I say PyTest, and PyTest by default looks in the folder for every file that starts with test underscore, and in there it searches for function with test underscore, or classes that start with test, and will execute them for me and tell me how I did. Now it's installed, Flake 8 and PyTest. And I can do math. And I didn't give any arguments, oh God. Doing everything wrong. Well, at least it tells me what I do wrong. Okay, let's pass in some arguments. 2 times 3 should be 5 though. So let's say 6. Yeah, now I have a green test and I even have a smiley face in the end. And what this does then is running PyTest directly. And if I want to, I mean, I don't develop through Tox if I'm in PyCharm. But what I want to do is I want to use this environment for my development. I don't want to have to do anything extra. So I just want to be able to choose that easily. And for that, there's a plugin. It's called PyMunich, and it gives me this little context string here. And then I can choose the environment. And now it's part of my project setup. Except there's a little display bug still. Yes, so there it says I don't have an interpreter. If I open it once, if I open it again, it tells me temp new approach.talks dev. So now I have this set as my project environment. And
Sorry, what was the name of the plugin?
Yeah, I better show you. It's in the Nokia organization on GitHub. PyMunich. It has 2 bugs that annoy me that I opened already, and I hope somebody who can do Java will fix them. I would do it myself, but I'm not really into Java. So one is this display bug that in the first time it shows it's not there, and if you open it again it's there, and the other one is if you have more than one project in here, then although in the webinar this it works, so then it should set all them on all projects, but at the moment it doesn't do it for all or doesn't do it at all, so that's a bit what we study. But if you have a simple project like this, this works absolutely flawlessly. So, and now I can basically run my test directly here. But, ooh, what was that? Nothing happened? Gone. So I have to tell PyCharm that I want to use PyTest as my test runner, because the standard is still its unit test, so I have to switch this to PyTest. And then if I run this again, it will still not realize it, and that is because of this run configurations. You have to tell PyCharm then that it should forget the run configuration by pressing on that minus there, and then it should work. Yeah, and now I have my test overview here. And if I want to do fast iterations and break my code quick, then I switch this auto test on, and it runs my tests automatically, so I don't even have to do anything. So Tox doesn't mean now you have to do all your text testing through Tox all of a sudden. It's just this convenience wrapper that creates the environments for you and that runs the tests. And if you have it set up, your fellow developers can do exactly the same by having Tox installed and saying Tox -def, and they have the same setup. And then if you stick it in the CI system, it does the same there. So it just unifies all these workflows nicely. And that was basically what I wanted to say in super fast through. And I mean, if you have questions now about Tox, what you can do with it or something, I think I'd rather take questions than what you know.
So one question is there any possibility to select or to switch between 32-bit and 64-bit Python installations? So I can select a specific version, of course, but especially on Windows, you might have installed two architectures.
Yeah, but they are just installed then in two different locations. One is called 64 something, and whatever. So you have two completely different interpreters, and all you have to manage to do then is to create a virtual environment from them.
Yeah, but Tox does automatically creates a virtual environment for me. So how can I?
Yeah, that's the magic behind it. So basically, that's also some magic we can get rid of right now. So I can say explicitly, I mean, if I don't say anything, it just uses the interpreter that runs it. If I want to choose another interpreter, let's simplify it a little bit and say I want to also support Python 2, because that's what I have here, and I'm on Windows. In Windows, it's a little bit more tricky, the general thing, because the discovery of the interpreters is a bit tricky there. Because
I guess
it has to be on the
more
pattern.
into the direction of high-end the environment lookup.
Yeah, but PyF doesn't exist for Windows. I mean, the question was Windows specific, or?
I think it's Windows specific because Linux and macOS have a specific architecture, and you have no way of installing different architectures or install different Python interpreters.
Yeah, in Windows there is something, we have something in our developer, I mustn't say, it's called FAQ, Oliver. Don't say the other word, it sounds like something else. Here, multiple Python versions on Windows. This example is with Conda, but basically the trick is to create a little batch file that then links into the thing that you want to run, and put this batch file on your path and call it, for example, then Python 2.764 or something. And then you could ask for it here explicitly. So it was date Python, and here let's do it in a different, and I do this now with Python 2.7, but it's the same thing. If you have an executable on the path that you can address directly, then you can ask for it like this. Let's try this here now with Python 2.7.
Can you also give a full path name to the Python executable?
I think yes, but that defeats the purpose completely. Because then, I mean, if you think about it on I want to do this on my machine, it should work on my colleague's machine, it should work on CI. So you should have a single name, but I think that's even possible. Yeah.
But even this solution requires every developer to add the batch file into its path. So
yeah,
my machine,
a Windows programmer. Yeah. I mean, Windows is really a pain in the ass on many levels, and also on Python. But if you want to know Windows-specific things, I'm the completely wrong person to talk to. But there is somebody called Steve Dower. He's at Microsoft, and he gives really good talks about A, he really tries to make it better in Windows, and B, he can explain well how it's better. And there's one thing. It's called the launcher, I think. If you install it on Windows, then you can say install launcher also, and this takes care of these different versions. Then you have a py command, just py, py.
I know it, yes.
You know that?
Yes.
Does that work for you?
Yes, it works, but I cannot use it for,
Yeah, you might. You know, that's the thing. Then
yeah.
in some Windows, that's the other thing. We don't have any. Oh yeah, we have a Windows person now as a core developer on top. So maybe things will be getting better automatically because he will fix his own problems. Open source. Yeah, it doesn't hurt me, so I don't really care. It's Python 2.7, and then I do the same. I test, and because I'm lazy, just let me show you another thing. Everything inherits now from this test end. So if I say something there, that is valid for everything else. So I just move this up there, and also use develop. Yeah, and why not also the command, because we're doing the same thing basically. So I just end up with, okay, please use this Python interpreter here. And as I don't say explicitly anything up here with envlist, where I could choose which should run by default. I could say there run def and py27, and then it would do that. Or if I leave it out, then it will run all the environments that are defined. So now it ran the 3 again. That was there already. That was fast. And now you create Python 2.7, and that also fails. And now, if I want to, and that's then really handy, if I want to switch them between 2.7 and 3.6 or something, then I can just choose this here, and then now I'm on 2.7 all of a sudden. I didn't really answer your question.
But there's also another thing. There is the option of skip missing interpreters, so that if you have something where you might suppose that you test on different versions, and in Windows you just have, for example, one Python 3 and Python 2 on the path, so you can skip all the several subversions of Python 3 and just test against the Python 3 version that is in the past.
Okay, try to be future proof. I think it is written like this. Yeah, I mean, the short answer usually for this is always there is an option for that in TOX somewhere for doing a lot of things. Yeah, so this now it crashes. It would crash normally if I would set to false, but now it just says skip. That can also help them. There was something.
How is the TOML file fitting in there? Would that take some of the dependencies and like specify some of the stuff you have in the TOX ini now? Or?
Well, the idea of this TOML file is based on two packs that play together. I think 5.7 and 5.8. And the problem it tries to solve, and will hopefully solve, is that at the moment we are bound to setup high and setup tools. That is the standard now, and Pip still well, not anymore, but relied on it. You basically were doomed to use that. And if you wanted to have some kind of other build system, you still had to work around all these problems. And PyProject TOML gets rid of that. You can then say, use this build backend, and it can be something completely different. There's one project that implements that already that I know about, is called Flit. And the idea is to make all this simpler, A, and B, to not be dependent on setup tools, setup file-based build systems anymore. So that there's room for innovation again, or for new things to happen. So in PyProject TOML, then we say build backend here in this case, Flit.build API, and then you have a project completely without a setup file, and it's still doing the same thing. And you configure everything in there basically like in setup file, and you don't have code anymore, which is good, I think.
Yeah.
You don't need executable code there really. Yeah.
I was wondering, can I also use select dependencies that are not on PyPy but on
index, whatever, defp or artifactory, you just need to know around, and you can have several, so you can set a default index and then you can put other indexes so that you can actually look in different places. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the tox config, the overview, that is quite a long page, and it's still growing. So you have a lot of settings, and basically you could do everything. And if you can't do it, open an issue. You can't fly it.
Toxiny file is looking for a tox project.
There's no
Tox
such thing as a tox project.
I
You mean the setup high thing, or?
no, the tox project which is development, it's on Python, right? And you're most probably using tox ini as well for initializing them.
I don't understand. Do you mean if the tox project uses tox itself? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But can we have a
Eat your
look at
own
tox
notebook.
ini file inside?
Sorry?
If we, yeah.
Can you have a look at this tox ini file for the tox
Open it
project?
now. Or?
Yeah. Just as an example,
Or
real
is-
world example.
If you want to be scared. Yeah, I mean, this is why I did it the other way around. You know, I wanted to show you you don't need hardly anything to get started, and then you can do rocket science. And Tox is a good example for that. So you can, I mean, we support a lot of languages, interpreter versions, also PyPy 3, and then we do coverage, fixing. We do automatic formatting with black for a while now, which is quite nice. So this is the fixed lint. So beginner. And we wrap all this in pre-commit. That's, I think I have the project open actually. So the pre-commit framework is something really handy for all this quality assurance stuff that you do before you actually start testing your code. So you can run black through it and fix trading, white space, check if your YAML files are okay, if somebody left a debug statement there. There's like a list that long on things that you can do. So this packages all this. That is one environment. Then do the coverage, send the stuff to coveralls. This is an old thing that I really don't know why it's still there. This for some ad hoc testing, I think. If you see things like this, you can also configure other tools in ToxIni because they are aware that it might be there, and then they look for the configuration also in ToxIni or in setup config, CFG, different places. So you can configure the tools in the ToxIni also, that you don't have too many config files flying around. ISort that all sorts imports, and this is then how you do releases. So basically, Tox is the one place where you then can look, okay, how does this project do anything? How does it build its documentation? How does it do its releases? And one thing that Bernard added recently is super handy for that. If I actually go to the Tox, let's go to, if I do now this in my Tox project and ask for what is in there, then these descriptions that you saw, they are actually shown, and they're generated and shown here for what does this environment do. And this is basically like an ad hoc developer documentation. Any more questions?
Is there a particular reason why you're not using a subset of Python as the configuration language?
Well, then look at Nox. It's another project that does that exactly for that reason. I don't like any files. So that's quite new still, or new-ish. I think it's from last year or 1.5 years ago. And they use Python for
You know, it seems like a reasonable choice to use any file. Just is it technically easier for you, or was it just started that
well,
way?
any file is actually grown into some kind of monster because we do all kinds of weird things with all these substitutions, and then you can inherit dependencies from other environments, and there's all kinds of special syntax grown on top of the ini, which causes all kinds of problems when you change something there because it's like a homegrown parser and blah. So I actually opened an issue last year. Let's do something else, but it's now going to be PyProject Toml. So we support already that you can stick an old style ini in PyProject Toml by using what are they called? Those strings that you remember they are white space. Basically a doc string, like a triple quoted script string with an original tox ini with all the old stuff, and then we just take it out there. So we're cheating a bit there. But this is going to be supported at some point.
So how does it play with the CI scripts? Because in CI you have different jobs, and here you have different sections.
Yeah.
So when do you use a CI job, and when do you open a section in the tox.ini file?
Well, in my work environment, one tox environment is one build stage on the CI. So I have a tox linting environment, and that is one stage on the CI. And then if that doesn't fail, then the next one comes. And they are all mapped one-on-one to tox environments. So I have a lint stage, I have a test stage, and an upload stage or whatever, so that maps one-on-one.
Okay, so it's a little bit redundant because you have to enter every stage. You open in your tox file again in your CI script.
It's not redundant because you just call the tox
Yeah,
environment.
yeah.
You define your stage, and the only code basically we have in there is tox minus E, name of the environment, and that's it. And it runs the same on CI, hopefully, like on my developer box. And usually the configuration doesn't look too scary. On Travis, for example, for simple projects. I mean, also if you have more complicated projects, everything gets more complicated. But if you have a simple project, testing it on Travis is pip install tox, and I want to have the newest version, and that's my script.
Okay, but in this case you have only one job.
Yeah, they have only one job. Yeah, but okay, if you want to see something scary again, tox. That's what tox looks like. We moved to Azure a while ago, and I don't know anymore how that works because Bernard did that. Before our Travis file was like this, and now we are on this Windows team, whatever, and Steve Dauer helped us, and we are like data users there and picks, and now it looks like this, and then I have no idea. So yeah, but it seems to work, and our releases are pretty much automated. So there you have these stages.
It's really quite simple to make a fancy matrix out of the tox without any problems. So we in the Chrome project use that. Now a lot. Maybe collective if is a good example.
Django also does a lot of this kind of stuff. Which one would be a good example?
I think it's in the collective, the collective
Collective dot ft something? Or?
I think it does not live in the core package, but in the GitHub collective.
Could you give me a hint where that is?
Collective. GitHub.com collective.
Collective. Yes. Oh, I must have been there already.
And there he go and find PFTT.
If this then that.
And there is.
There's no tox.ini.
Well, it's in a different branch, so there's a tox branch or something like that.
Interesting. If I should stop, by the way, just stop me. I don't know.
We will still have questions.
So, yeah, this is generative way of creating environments, and this is just creating the names. That is not doing any magic. Just creating the names for the environments, and then in your tox.ini you can select for parts of them. So these between the dashes are called factors, and then if you want to do something that you only want to do in factor pi to 7, then you have somewhere in your tox.ini there pi to 7 colon. You should have it.
No, you don't need it.
Oh yeah, for here, if you this factor, for example, it should only happen in clone 4.3. Then do this in clone 5.0. Do this, and then
there is Travis CI file, and that might be interesting.
It's creating matrices. Yeah, there is also Tox also supports plugins. So if you say pip install Tox Travis, then it might generate the thing for you with all the different.
Can you show me probably the Travis file and the.
Maybe we switch to Q&A then,
This one?
if you are already done with it.
This is Q&A.
This is Q&A. All right.
Yes.
We need more open Q&A.
So there you see
Multi-person Q&A.
everything.
Okay, I see.
That's quite simple.
This is also quite verbose already. You can even squeeze that into
Yeah.
create a matrix from all this. But yeah, that's the more explicit way of saying it.
Cool. More questions, please.
Implicit.
More questions from the audience. Who liked talks? Good. At least we're polite. Just kidding. Come on. Questions. Yes, please.
So there is already an open issue about that. I cannot, or I can use requirements.txt /r requirements, but Tox doesn't recognize it automatically if I change the requirements.txt. It seems to be a more complicated
Actually,
job.
not a problem that Tox has. It's a problem of, let's say, pip and main pip, because this dependency resolution is just hard, and it just
Okay.
doesn't work properly, and it's not really something Tox can
So,
suddenly work.
Usually in bigger projects, I think you always have requirements.txt. So how is the best practices to work around that?
Tox minus R. Tox minus recreate, which means if something doesn't work as you accept, it doesn't
Okay.
realize something changed, then you have to help Tox by saying
Okay.
recreate yourself.
Yes, please.
Or would you use Tox also for applications, say non-library stuff? Well, I use pipenv for that, and I'm quite happy with that, but I don't know if Tox has any advantage over that.
Pipenv can't do what Tox can. Pipenv solves different problems.
Yeah, with the dependency stuff, and then you have probably some setup files or
Tox
something.
is basically process automation for everything, where you can automate your release, building your documentation, whatever. And pipenv freezes your versions. It gives you the possibility to have development dependencies and production dependencies. And I think it is meant for building applications, but it's not having the same kind of functionality like Tox. They're not in the same group, so to say, basically. Just looks like it maybe on the first.
Well, but Tox does a bit of that also, does it? Like
Yeah,
the
it creates
dependency,
virtual
like
environments for
development
you.
dependency versus like production dependencies and that kind of stuff. pipenv would do that as well. So, but you would need other stuff then to compensate for that, what it's not doing.
How would you test your code using pipenv?
Pardon?
How would you test your code using pipenv then? Where
Well,
do
you
put
use
the command
PyTest and then,
run?
or have a setup file where you like the flag 8 stuff and black, and also
Yeah, and
have then a
where would you
setup
put
file or
that?
something.
Where
Pardon?
would you put that? Because you can't put it in pipenv, unless I don't
Yeah,
understand.
that would be a separate file, but then you wouldn't
And
like.
a separate command to start also. So the idea of Tox is to have all of this automated, so you can just say Tox do stuff, and it's going to do stuff for you. You have it all written down in your Tox file.
Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, you have this commands thing in the Tox file. The commands here. And here you can put whatever you want. So building a virtual environment is just one of the things, and that is just, I build a virtual environment for you, and then you do what you need to do. And the big advantage of this is then I do that locally, I run this, and it does the thing, and then I stick it on a CI system, for example, and it does the same thing. It runs my tests for me there, the same way I do it locally. So so Tox is process automation, and it happens to create virtual environment and install everything also. And I think pipenv is more in the realms of abstracting a few problems away that a lot of developers have around this whole dependency management topic. And they might interoperate at some point. I see you want to stop me with violence now, or?
Save it up, and you have the microphone. You can use it as a weapon. But we have time for one more question.
And now we're afraid, of course.
Now you're afraid. All right. Yeah. Well, you can still chat on the break. we have more content today. I liked talks. I definitely was missing this piece of software, so I personally will ask Oliver more things during the break. But for now, that's it, and let's just have a 5 minutes break before the next talk, which will be, by the way, also cool. Can't miss it. So big thanks to Oliver. My question is, yes. So you don't need CI. It is CI.
Ja, ich finde, weiß ich dann ein bisschen. Das erledigt das ist sehr diese Dependencies, die er da auch spezifiziert, aber dann bei den Doc-Stage spezifizieren,
Nice. Yes, please. Stop it. It's okay.
To be part of it. My Firefox version does block the content by default. So just to let you know. By default it's unlocked. I'm not sure. Disable it, I can. It's a resource. Sure, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how it. Okay, just here. I'll read it around. No, just to notify you. I'm not sure how it works.
How much did we miss because of this? You said I could do it in 30 minutes. Oh, yeah. Live. You check it?
Is this Bluetooth or not? Ah, that's what I'm missing. Oh, yeah.
Great. All right, now turn it on. Yeah, now turn it on. Now switch content. Great. All right. Now it works. Ready? This is the clicker.
This is a big report, so I can just talk about this.
All right. Let's continue. Our next speaker, Paul Everett, will have a spontaneous and exciting talk about Python in 1994. This will be like a surprise talk for us. Paul is a long-time Python enthusiast. He is with Splon for how long?
50 years.
I guess from 1994?
No. Gotta take my shoes off to count that.
All right. Yeah. Right now Paul is working with JetBrains, and it's cool that he came over to Munich. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Being a developer advocate at JetBrains means justifying your salary by giving talks at conferences. Welcome to the JetBrains Twitter feed for tomorrow. It's my Christmas bonus too, so please be enthusiastic. Okay, I have to start with an apology. Some of you, Hertz, who is probably left, have heard my bullshit before. So I'll try and upgrade my bullshit. And I will start by getting right to the point and do a little quiz about when you started using Python. Okay? Raise your hand if you were using Python in 2017. All right? All right. Raise your hand if you were using Python in 2012. Still got some, all right? Raise your hand if you were using Python in 2008.
Using or started using?
Anything related to Python. All right, good.
16.
Raise your hand if you were using Python in 2002. You? All right, good. All right. Yeah. All right. Raise your hand if you were using Python in, let's just make a big jump, 1997. Okay, it's 1999. Okay, one hand. Raise your hand if you were using Python in December of 1992. So we're going to have a little talk. We're going to talk about the origins of Python. Now, it is 8:15, yeah? And I promised to give a 30-minute talk. In St. Petersburg 2 months ago, I gave a 30-minute talk, and it lasted 2.5 hours. But don't tell Lance. This is a talk which anyone who's heard my talks before knows that you never learn anything, but you'll have a lot of fun. So please feel free to get up and walk out here. We're going to talk a little bit about what Python was like in the very beginning. Partially, if you want to think in terms of learning something from it, if you want to be the next great creator or something important in Python, you can learn about how Python itself formed its community and became hotter than the surface of the sun. Or you can just laugh and hear about what we thought we knew, but we didn't. So,
That's not going to be done now.
okay, let's take the first slide.
Do you want the first time?
Yeah, I'll just go. I'll just do it. Unless you think you can get it. All right, we're giving it a try. All right. So imagine it's 1994. Now, for some of you, okay, I gave this talk in St. Petersburg, and when I said imagine it's 1994, and I looked in the audience, those people were born in 1994. So it was a little embarrassing. So pretend you were born in 1994, and think about the context that we were in. Come on. All right. We had a Clinton in the White House. This joke was a lot funnier 2 years ago. We had the #1 movie of the year. Was Tom Cruise, before he went all Scientology. And we had this crazy new thing called the internet. Anyone ever use NCSA Mosaic? What? 2. All right, good. So this was cool because this was this little known thing called Amazon. This is what Amazon looked like in 1994. Want to give it a try? I committed the sin of developer advocate. I left my clicker in the hotel room, thinking I was in there speaking. It's over here.
Maybe I'll just be your.
Okay, the thing you can't hear. No, it's not one.
The down one is.
Oh.
They're all forward.
That one. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so this is. Okay, this is what Amazon looked like in in 1994, and the next slide's funny, but you can't hear it because it's the sound of a modem connecting to Amazon. Amazon's gotten a little faster since then. Yeah. And something else happened in 1994. And usually I have this T-shirt with Python this 1994 on the back, which is also a funny story because I had this T-shirt from 1994 with NIST on the back. Important shirt because it was the very first Python conference, and I had the shirt. Pretty cool, right? So I had this stack of shirts, which was the stack of shirts to never, under any circumstances, lose. Okay? And I had this other stack of shirts which my wife could take to something called Goodwill, which is the store for poor people, blah, blah, blah. So, Paul, I'm going to the store. What shirts are okay here? And I spent 10 years thinking that some homeless guy in Virginia was wearing the Python 1994 shirt, living under a bridge somewhere. But she predicted that I would have Alzheimer's and took that shirt and put it in a special place. So I found the shirt 10 years later. And so in 1994, the Python community started. And what do I mean by started? We had a workshop, and we're going to talk about that tonight in under 30 minutes. And we're going to have a conversation. Any questions you have, any input you have, and I'm also going to quiz you about your historical knowledge on some things. Please participate on this. It's supposed to be fun. A little bit about, this is the I Love Me slide. My funny story is, for 2 years, I was Guido's boss. And anybody knows Guido and knows me knows how ludicrous that is. But I've had a participation in some things along the years in Python, and my role in the whole drama is to bring coffee to the smart people. So before 1994, the world of computing had gotten kind of interesting. Traditionally, there were these big-time programming languages, C and C++ and things like that. And then as computers got faster and the internet started getting involved, there was this class of things called scripting languages. We don't use that term anymore, which is an important part of the story. But scripting languages were viewed as toys. I'll write it in the toy thing, and then the grown-ups will show up and convert everything to the real thing. And so Python got slotted into the toy language. And these were its competitors, Perl and TickleTK and Python. Again, this talk is nothing more than an excuse to tell funny stories. This is the first Python book. Guido has his name on it. This artwork was done by the graphics artist at my company who didn't know anything about Python. She said, what should I put on the cover? And I said, well, it's like a snake and spam, and Guido has glasses. So that's the artwork that unfortunately became the first book for Python. Guido's story was pretty interesting. Many of you may have read about his background. He was on the language team for hopefully the next generation language, and it didn't pan out. And he learned some lessons from ABC, that project. And kind of over a holiday break or something, he decided to make an ABC-like language, just a little bit simpler, had his design taste, and make it available for free. And put it on this thing called the internet. If there was no internet, now, ABC didn't have the internet too soon. Python had the internet. And Guido has said if there was no internet, there wouldn't really be a Python, because it was important for something out of nowhere to spread. And Guido put it out on the internet and created a mailing list to organize the Python community to be able to talk to them and announce things and let people talk to each other. This is the birth of the Python mailing list. Look up in the corner and see how long ago that is. 1991. And Guido's talking about this, and it's kind of funny because the second email to the Python list is to explain when you reply to something, there's going to be these quote marks, and you put your comment under that. This is the way that, so cute.
Can I ask a question? Can you go back a slide? There was actually an answer to why Python. Who asked that? What?
Well-
Somebody didn't understand why somebody should use Python? Or?
And so, okay, I'll step on a future joke, but several things happened in the beginning years, which is why Python and not Perl or typical TK. We had this over and over and over. And Java showed up. Like every message was talking about that. But there was also the question, especially when back in those days there was this popular system called Usenet for sending messages like a big bulletin board, but for the entire freaking internet. And they created a Usenet group called Comp Lang Python. Okay, Comp, short for computers, Lang, language, Python. All the messages were about Monty Python. No, you're in the wrong place. You're still in the wrong place. So these messages were from that time. And they had a whole bunch of what is Python, over and over and over. And so Guido explained how to do comments. Let's do a little bit of a test for you old timers. What does UUCP stand for? Anybody? Anybody?
Unix copy.
You got it. No one else gets that. Did you also know?
Yeah, someone else over there.
Yeah, all right, good. Okay. Now I can see this, but I don't think you can stuff it. You know what that is?
Telephone
Yes! Telephone.
service?
Yes, we have a wiener. Plain old telephone service. Internet communication was back in those days. This is my first message to the Python community. You'll find this funny. I don't know how much you know my Zope days, but the very first message I send is about storing data and making it available on the web. This is, from a user point of view, we see this over and over. Even back in 1994, Guido was against Lambdas. So for those of you who know Guido, that is his hobby horse over the years, is how much he hates Lambdas and he resisted putting it in the lab. This is an interesting conversation. We talked about this going into the workshop, the governance of Python, and what if a project that was from a person that you didn't create Tox, did you? Exactly. And he managed to find a way to get someone else to run it, right? So we were talking about what if this thing gets popular? We weren't popular. And Guido left or had some other reason to get out of Python. And so the idea of getting hit by a bus was talked about back then. Again, dropped out of exhaustion, rubbed out by a member of a rival language, etc. At this point in the prehistory, we start talking about meeting up. A very important and under-recognized person in the history of Python, Mcclure, was at a government institution called National Institutes of Standards and Technologies, NIST. And he had a little bit of budget, and he was doing a little bit of Python, and Guido was at CWI. I can't pronounce it. Anybody know how to pronounce CWI, the Dutch expression for CWI? Center for blah, 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 blah?
Oh yeah, Center for Wiskunde en Informatica.
Yes, thank you. All right. He was at CWI, and Michael got money to bring him to the United States as kind of a guest researcher under NIST. If that wouldn't have happened, you wouldn't be sitting in this room. Because when he did that, Guido then met up with the next group of people that we'll talk about, Cnri. So they organized a workshop. And this was the list of topics. What did we think were the problems to be solved in the world of Python in 1993, 1994? Read that list and see if you have anything that you still hate that was on the list in 1993, 1994.
Type is probably whiskey.
Yeah. They did it anyway. So you may know a thing or two about things like that.
Yeah.
All right, so these were the list of topics, and this was kind of a funny one from my perspective based on what we did at the workshop. Okay, pictures. These are some of the people from the workshop. This is Guido. Oh, he looks so cute, doesn't he? This was me before I got married, and you can spend more than $5 on a haircut. This is Barry Warsaw. If you've ever met Barry, this is what Barry looks like on the inside. An accurate rendition of Barry's personality. What was it like to be at this workshop? What are the kind of things we talked about? It's interesting because some of you may have had some kind of moment in your experience where you knew it was significant. Or you didn't think it was significant and later you realized it was significant. We're right in between those. We knew something that this Python thing was kind of important. Didn't think it would be the #1 programming language in the world. But we kind of took it seriously. But the funny thing was, Michael got a room that would fit 25 people. And I remember my reaction was, wow, a Python conference that can fit 25 people? What are we going to do with all that space? It's a terrible office building in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And so we have this meeting, we talk about a number of things, and a lot of the people in that room wound up going on to be key people in the next decade of Python. But very importantly, Guido's next job was located in that room, Cnri, Corporation for National Research Initiatives. So we tackled a couple of things. We started to plant the seeds for building a larger community, splitting into different kinds of groups that would handle different kinds of topics. And then what came out of that workshop? What were the next couple of years like? Lots of this. Blah, 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 I haven't read anything that ever happened, but please answer my question. How is Python different than Perl or Tcl? Lots and lots of positioning within the realm of scripting languages. At that time, Perl was the king of the hill. Raise your hand if you've written a line of Perl in the last 2 years. Ha, 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 ha. All right, good. Not very many. I laugh because Guido told a story. The first time this talk was given was a keynote at PyCon 3 years ago, and Guido told a story. He was at a table with Larry Wall, the creator of Perl, and Guido and a couple of other people, and one of Larry's Perl friends wanted to tease Larry and said, "Hey Larry, are you worried about that Python thing?" And Larry said, "Python will never amount to anything." So the fact that all of you have written Python, very few people have written Perl, says a lot about predictions.
We have a Python user group, okay. Indeed. Okay, so we have a lot of these kinds of emails, and then we planned a next workshop. You may recognize, some of you may recognize the name of the top, Jim Fulton. This was at Menlo Park in California, and Jim organized, they were called Span 1, Span 2, Span 3 back then, so he organized Span 2 and Span 3. And these were some of the things that we started talking about getting involved with. So it was at the U.S. Geological Survey in Menlo Park. Interesting, several interesting things from this. I told some of you before, we had, okay, again, a small conference, metal chairs, terrible room, and we had 2 people from the Stanford Digital Library Project. Now, anyone want to guess what I'm referring to when I say the Stanford Digital Library Project? You almost said it. Go ahead and say it. I heard the sound. Google. Google was written in Python in the beginning. And so 2 guys, one of them was Larry, I believe. Scott Hassan, I think, was the other. And a presentation about Sun's set-top programming language. Not yet named. Anyone want to give me the name? Java. So, one of those moments where you think, hey, I'm sitting in a metal chair in Menlo Park, California. But important things were happening then. So out of that, we certainly had talked a lot about Java after that.
And we created the precursor to the Python software foundation called the PSA because things were getting to be important and we needed to organize activities. This is a way old page that describes way old pages. I have the dishonor of creating the very first working group in the history of Python that failed utterly. The catalog sig, which is now known as PyPI, the warehouse. Yeah, so it failed multiple times before it got to that, and I'm the original failure. That sounds like a tombstone, doesn't it?
Congratulations.
Thank you. So that is retiring my special interest group. Guido moved to something called Cnri, Corporation of National Research Initiatives, headed by the guy who claimed to create the internet, Bob Kahn. What he meant was he was the boss of the guy who created the internet. But that notwithstanding, he employed Guido and the Python Labs team, Barry and Roger and Jeremy and Fred. And they were going to make a web browser with Python as the implementation language. They did make it. It just didn't go very far. Now, some of you heard me say this before. Barry tells a story that around that time, a little company called Netscape called Guido and said, we want a scripting language for our web browser. We'd like to use Python. But SGML is white space insignificant. So we're going to need either braces or semicolons. Guido said no. As if millions of souls cried out at once, and JavaScript was born.
Oh my God.
Literally, the next time you curse at JavaScript, think of Guido.
Implement from future import braces then?
Maybe. That might have been a reaction. Or 10 readers did it. We had our third workshop, USGS again in the East Coast this time. Jim hosted it again. A lot more stuff going on. I have a lot of funny, tragic stories from my history of things. At this one, I was giving a workshop on web programming and CGI, what was known then as CGI. And we had at the time a system, so this thing called CGI meant every time a web request came in, the universe would be created, it would serve the request, and the universe would be deleted. Slow, heavyweight. We created a system that let you put something inside of the web server and something inside of Python, and it would be a long-running process. And, you know, interesting. In the workshop were two guys from a company called eShop who were doing Microsoft stuff and had an e-commerce solution for Microsoft written in Python, for Microsoft IIS, for the Microsoft platform. And they took our open source thing, plugged it in, and got a big speed up, and sold the effing company to Microsoft. And Microsoft Commerce Server 1.0 had the thing that they found from our company in the first release. And one of the founders was Pierre Omidyar, who founded this small company called eBay. Missed the boat on that one.
But wasn't eBay written in Perl?
Yes. Well, I don't know if it was or not, but you're right, it had no relation to this. He spent 6 months at Microsoft, got his golden parachute, and got out. So I'm doing that count in 30 minutes, right? All right, 6 months. I'm going too fast for a lot of questions, but I still have a whole bunch of funny stories to tell. I'll stop for a moment. Any questions so far about rumors you've heard from the early years of Python, or any other things you want to talk about? Any questions?
What happened to Parrot?
You mean the Perl 6 thing?
The Python implementation for Perl.
Well, Python.
Yeah, the Perl Python thing, yeah. It eventually, well, something eventually shipped, but I don't know if it was the Perl Python thing, right? Okay, everything reminds me of a funny story. I've got a funny story about that. When we first, okay, so I'm co-founder of this, okay, I'll do the tragic thing. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of something called Zope. Oh, actually, that's a few hands. Okay. So I'm co-founder of Zoe. We had, and we got a whole bunch of money. We spent our first $200,000 on a Perl to Python language bridge so that we could make a CMS to serve the Perl community. Right? Did I mention $200,000? Did I say that out loud? $200,000? It was used by 2 people. So that's my parents' story. Any other questions? All right, so I've got questions.
You can take as much time as you need. It's 30 minutes. It was a initial
A
study.
guideline.
Goal. Yeah. So no worries.
This is an interesting question because and it has some other interesting questions that go with it. Python had and has a history of being pretty kind. And lots of other things over the decades weren't that kind. They had kind of a programmer, macho, BS thing. And people were attracted to Python because a new person, new to programming, etc., could feel welcome. And a lot of people that are the rock stars in Python now came in that way. Why? Why was Python like this and other things weren't? Was it because of things in the very early years that set the culture that was then used for the rest of the history of Python? Jim Fulton, who's co-founder of Zope, was on the keynote panel when we did this at PyCon 2 years ago. He said Python is kind and human because Guido is kind and human. Raise your hand if you've met Guido. Okay, not too many. All right. You haven't met Guido? All right. A very unassuming Dutch kind person who now has stepped down as the benevolent dictator for life. Another expression from the workshop in 1994, actually. Stepped down as BDFL and has decided what he wants to do is mentor women to become programmers on the core Python team. That is his mission in life, which is pretty cool and is not representative of all programming languages. Now this is a harder one. Python succeeded. Other things, Parrot, didn't. Why? Did we have some great font of wisdom? Were we just so smart? Why I say we, them. Did we make a strategic 10-year roadmap that we followed? Oh no. It was a lot that was accidental. But at the same time, there were some things that weren't, some things that you could learn some lessons from. In particular, the whole scripting language thing was an interesting deficit that turned, or weakness that turned into a strength. We were a toy. Well, you know what? At that time, when the internet gets involved and you have the network effects of bazillions of people suddenly getting online and becoming programmers and the web and all these other things, they want a toy. They don't want C. And so a whole generation of people adopted the easy thing rather than the hard thing and found out they could do hard things with the easy thing, if that makes any sense. And then Java came along, rearranged the rules completely about systems programming language versus higher programming language, higher level language, and nobody talked about those categories anymore. And then Python really took off. I'll go to a kind of a bonus round thing. Python has, we'll say, 3 phases. The prehistoric era when I was involved, the Middle Ages, and then the most recent third. And we'll roughly say the advent of the PSF and the Python conference in particular, PyCon in the US, is indicative of the beginning of the middle period. In the last third, Python has been like that, like hugely, ludicrously popular. Why? Okay, data science. Anybody else? What in the last 8 years or so would explain why Python has become this phenomenon? Big data, okay?
We need a lot of programs and it was very easy to learn.
That's a Good point, because programmers are cheaper than CPUs. Yes. Anything else? You're laughing. Do you have an answer? Okay.
The other way around.
From-
CPUs are cheaper
Oh, sorry. Yes, the other way. Yeah. Thank you. Developer advocates are even cheaper. Any other choices about why Python has become hotter than the surface of the sun?
Well, Jace, a little bit into this, why Python succeeded. I think, it came from this ABC, this research language, which had the ideal of creating a language for the human brain rather than for the CPU to interpret. And this is just a very important aspect. That's why it's easy to learn also. It's just, it's a language for the human. And this
A language for the human.
More important.
All right.
But we have
Anything else?
other languages for the Ruby,
That's
for
true,
example.
that's
so.
true, that's true. All right.
That's-
Clearly, I have an answer in mind, but I'll keep taunting
Okay.
you by asking you your.
Okay.
Because it's, well, no, we had interpreted things in '94. Tickle. Who does tickle? Nobody.
But it was important to be.
I think you're right. I agree. I agree.
You can provide it though.
The rebel, but the others have rebels too. A lot of the others do. Stefan?
Well, there's a lot of getting around it. I mean,
Getting closer, warmer community, all right? More specifically,
XML.
oh, I wish. Half of my bookshelf would be valuable. Any other choices? No? Okay, yeah.
Batteries included?
Batteries included, that's a good choice. That's a very good choice. that's what got me. When in 1992, 93, thank you for reminding me of a funny joke. 1992, 93, I was a Navy officer. Pretty funny. This is like 5 funny stories. I apologize, Ernst. This is like 5 funny stories. So, 1985, how am I going on time? Do I have another hour?
Please continue.
Okay, 1985, a movie comes out, Top Gun. 5 years later, the Navy has like 400,000 people in flight school because they can't predict, oh yeah, we had a lot of people sign up because of the movie. So I sat around flight school getting paid to go shark fishing for a year and a half. Thank you, US taxpayer. And I had to cheat to get into flight school because I'm short. And I'm particularly short from my butt to knee. And when you're a pilot, the cockpit, if you eject and your legs are sticking out, the bottom half of your body will be left in the cockpit. And they've paid $1 million to train you. It's not cost effective. So I cheated by taking my wallet and filling it with $1 bills, so that when my butt scooched back, I just barely made it into flight school. But my eyes went over the limit while I was shark fishing, possibly causation, correlation, I don't know. And I had to find another job, and there was a guy named the Navy Internet Manager in Pensacola, Florida, where flight school was. So I was like, what's the internet? Sounds cool. And our job was to do things on this internet thing that were interesting, including getting other people to use this internet thing. And the guy sitting beside me ran the domain Navy.mil. And I remember one day, I can easily remember this, I scooched my little chair back into the cubicle and I say, hey Mike, can I have www.navy.mil? And he said, what's that? I said, I don't know, but let's give it a try. And what we found was the #1 way to get someone in the Navy to adopt the internet was to put a picture of the commanding officer on the homepage. Automatically they agreed, because you got to suck up to the boss. So we had this internet stuff, and back in those days, this is crazy to think about. If you made a website and you wanted it to be listed on the internet, you sent an email to Tim Berners-Lee, and he edited a file at CERN that listed your website. And so we were like one of the first 200 websites. Those days are over. And I needed a scripting language because even then there were extension facilities. So I go to the bookstore, and I'm like, Perl, I've heard about that. hell no. And then the only reason I adopted Python was because it had a tutorial that I could download, print, and it was uniquely engineered to fit my brain. It was like genetically Paul Everett. And the tutorial was part of what some of you have said about ease of use getting into and no distinction between the human and the computer and things like that. So that as a story for the rise of Python, I think is important, that it really made it easy to get involved. Now, I'll come all the way back to that thing. Why Python got super popular. Data science is the easy answer. In my opinion, an important answer is women. Around 8 years ago, the Python community made actual, tangible, strategic plans and put money behind it to change the equation about the representation at Python conferences for attendees and speakers and things like that. And damn if it didn't work. Exactly. Someone cared a lot about it, had clear new ideas, and put it to work, Jessica Mcclure, and made it happen. And now, I believe it's like 43, 44% of speakers, not just attendees, but speakers at PyCon are women. And that is, relative to the other languages, a heck of an achievement. And part of the reason why Python is growing in popularity, in addition to data science. In my opinion. Okay, any questions? Any stories? True, otherwise? No? Got everything?
Too many.
How did they achieve that? Because basically women is just how it was
Impossible. It seems impossible,
yeah,
doesn't
how
it?
is it executed?
There's a blog post from Jessica Mcclure that tells the story. She was interviewed by somebody and gave a full listing of the plan. It involved stepping back and doing analysis to collect numbers and collect some facts, and then going to local user groups, spending money to bring people in, to teach them how to bring women in who didn't feel ready yet to go to PyCon and speak, and giving them a speaking opportunity, creating a lot of user groups like Django Girls and Py Ladies where women were in charge, ran things, created a leadership system that brought people through the system up to the top and things like that. But because PyCon makes a bleak load of money, it wasn't just vision, there was some engine behind it. Does that make sense?
I would actually say it's the thing that goes back to Guido, that he is such a kind person, and we have seen it in so many of the different communities and even the sub-communities where they try to get women in. Some succeeded enormously, like Py Ladies, Jump Girls, and so on. Some others failed completely. But it's about the thing that Guido and some others of the early adopters of Python that started some of the sub-communities were so kind and so friendly to everybody. So it's the women, and it's also the queer community. There are so many people with different kinds of backgrounds that feel comfortable within the community without any harassment or something. That makes it so unique.
So the money and the culture.
And I would say in other ways, the culture and the money probably.
Yes.
The Rust community is also like that. It's also very, very, that a question about it, but also maybe embrace that welcoming
Good.
Environment.
Good.
Yeah.
Anything else? Thank you for staying late. Appreciate it.
This was great. Thank you so much. Yeah, we still have one activity left for today. It's our expert panel. So who would be our expert? Raise your hands. It's for sure Paul. Then it's for sure Alexander, that's for sure. Oliver? Really? Yes. You said you are PyTest expert.
No, I didn't.
Yes. And that's for sure Stefan over there. So I suggest that we do not make a break because it's an open format anyway. What we will do now is we will put the first row of our experts will be doing the panel, and we'll have just questions from our audience. You can grab the beer, you can grab the snacks if anything is left from the kitchen, and just come back here. So it's nothing formal. Just feel relaxed, feel free, and come closer because today you can ask any question about Python for free. That's like, those are professionals. So take your chance and better do that. Yeah, that's fine. Get closer, come on, friends. T-Man.
I don't know.
You're going soon? Alright, that's fine. Okay. Sander?
Just fake it until you make it.
Could be, who knows? Okay, so I think that at the beginning, because it's hard to just come up with a question out of nowhere, if you could just say a few words about yourself and in which fields you feel your expertise is, it would make some start, with names, some topics, some areas, and then it will be easier for the audience. You start, please.
Yeah. I'm Alexander Löchel. I got addicted to Python because of Paul and all the work he does. He's starting Zob and the Clone project, and I came to that same by Clone by 2003. Working with Python since then. Been the organizer of the Munich Python user group for the last 2 years, been on the board of directors of the Plum Foundation now for the 6 years, being member of the Plum security team, head of the security team, actually working at the university here in Munich as something like the CTO, and doing all the stuff around Python using for testing our stuff and everything like that.
Yeah, I know a few things about Fox that might have transpired. I'm getting paid for writing Python code, which I couldn't believe when I got the job 7 years ago, and I still have it. And I'm also getting paid officially 20% of my time that I can do open source development. I had to go to my CTO to get through that, and they didn't really like the idea first because they don't think they get anything out of it. And then I just badgered them long enough to make them understand that they get a lot out of open source without having to pay a penny, and paying one developer in the whole company a little bit to do that won't hurt them too much. Yeah, I'm mainly doing build, test automation, and automating whatever I can do. So, and I'm involved in PyTest and talks and wherever I can help. So I know a lot about open source stuff, let's say it like that, or at least I think I do.
I'm Stefan Wiener, probably best known as one of the core developers of Python and main maintainer of XML, the XML library. I'm also paid for working for student, yeah, also for 6 years now. Had a Java company before that. 6 years ago, I switched to a company called Scooby, where we're building ebook flat rate application. statistics on that, figuring out what people say about what aspects of hotels. And then I sell the statistics back to the hotels to tell them how they can improve, how they can compare to the hotel next door, or how the hotel group works by country, by region, by city, things like that. So pretty large data processing. I'm actually not a core developer. I don't know how I got there. Still involved in discussions on the core developer list of Python. Mainly through my Python involvement. Because that, Python is a Python compiler that compiles Python to C, and so it touches a lot the C API that Python has. So whenever things are changing on that front, we usually notice troubles because some just goes wrong on our side. Often there are discussion perhaps how to improve things over there.
I'm Paul. I'm the first president of the Stefan Benel fan club. I spent trillions of very happy hours using your software. It was all downhill. Every one of you is a better programmer than me. I'm sincere about that. However, I got $14 million of investment money for a software product, which in Russian means ass.
What's the name? How it's called?
So, have any of you done that? I was also involved in Cuckoo, which is an unfortunate thing.
You're good at this, apparently.
No.
Well done. Great.
Programming is hard.
Yeah. Cool, thanks for the introduction. I also point out that we have a live stream there and we have 7 people right now watching it.
How long has this been going on?
Yes, and they're asking questions. So just because I read it right now, I will just translate this question. It's not really, I think, directly into our topics for today, but the question was how easy to deploy to Azure, and what platform it's a good one for deployment of Python scripts or Python software.
First, yeah, cloud deployments. What's a good platform?
Where you're trying to go to Azure? That's such a complex question. Like, you could code, you would put it on Azure, AWS, or Google Cloud.
Well, there was a question. We're trying to answer it. Can you deploy Python application to Azure, and is it a good idea?
Oh, if you can.
Yes.
Yes.
You can. Now, is it
Sure.
a good idea or not?
Depends.
Ask Steve Bauer.
Yeah. We are making the conference at Microsoft, I guess I'll ask again. No, I personally know that it works pretty good on Google App Engine, so that's usually the default one, but Azure.
Didn't Azure recently say that they're using more Linux than Windows?
Yeah. And Microsoft is using a lot of Python also today. So Azure actually has a good support for Python, so that's not a barrier or something for that.
And IPython.
If I might, I mean, if it's about where can I deploy Python, I would like to mention one thing that I like myself. It's called Python Anywhere.
Oh, yeah.
That makes it really simple to deploy your Python code. It has a really nice user interface. It has like an online shell where you can open the browser and do your things there. And it's very easy to get a web app online there, for example. And it's a nice company also. So that's what I would. If somebody who doesn't really know what to do and where and why, that would have a look at Python Anywhere.
Thank you. We had a comment.
How about doing a straw poll and raising hands who's using which, AWS, Google,
Let's do it.
AWS.
Who's using AWS? Probably everyone.
But because I'm being paid for it.
Who's using Azure? Ah, okay, some do. It's a good sign. Google App Engine,
or Compute Engine?
Python anywhere, everywhere. Good.
I'm not being paid for it, I use that.
How about Heroku? Anybody doing Heroku?
Yeah. Alright. Cool. Okay, let's have a next question. Next question, please.
Well, I have a question about ELSRM. What are your views on the governance model that the Python community should take up in your opinion? Should take? Maybe what lessons we can learn from other communities?
It's not true yet.
I'm not up to date with the latest developments in that. So
There's a good
maybe you can
article
use it a little bit.
where they try to, I think it's by Victor Skinner,
Yes.
who compares the 7 different, perhaps I think there are the 7 different government models. I know that it exists. I'm meant to read it. I didn't read it yet. I just know there's something like anarchy on the one side and just basically another BDFL, just a different one on the other side of the extreme.
Why don't you give an explanation of the backstory of what it's all about?
Well, so first of all, Credo stepped down as BDFL, as you already mentioned. You already mentioned the reason, right? He wants to, well, he has led Python development for the last 28 years, pretty much. And yeah, I mean, he's pretty much done with it. He says like that was enough. I mean, Python is at a point now where it can live on its own, and we have a large community with lots of people, lots of important people who are very involved in the actual development, and so there are better ways these
Good
days,
idea.
For the community to run than having him as the one person. Which I think that's a solid decision on his side. I mean, sure. He's done a lot, and he's seriously done a good job in the last 28 years. There's no way to say like, yeah, thanks, but sorry you're leaving. So it's kind of like, he has done the job that he was needed to do. And now the core developers of CPython have started long discussions about how they want to structure their own work. He even said that he was not going to be involved in that discussion at all. He's not the one taking that decision. He's out of the loop there, and he wants them, so he wants the people who are already technically responsible for the Python development. He wants them to take that decision on their own.
And how do you do that? With text.
Yeah.
There's 7
But a lot of face-to-face human interaction as well.
And how is the discussion? I haven't, like I said, I'm not up to date. How is the discussion in the community around those factors? I hope it's a friendly discussion and around it.
I view it as friendly.
I think it's a friendly and honest discussion between all of the core committers. There are different points of view with different ideas how to continue the thing, and there's no final decision how to make it now. There, I think you said it right, with 7 different proposals how to go from total anarchy to another BL on both sides, and there are different opinions, and I also have a different opinion because I've seen one model that I think would fit the same for the Python community at all, that comes from the sub-community. That's worked out very well for always 18 years now.
Indeed. How many understand, raise your hand if you know what he's talking about Guido Lane resigning. Okay, so perhaps we should kind of do a rewind on that. So Guido, important. Creative language. Been doing it a long time, as you mentioned. And he was bringing forth a tiny little feature and got a ton of shit about it.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, I've listened to all of you, and here's my verdict. And they kept giving him shit about it. And he was like, life's too short, I'm out. Go figure out a new plan. Which is a lesson to all of us, which is, when I say all of us, I mean Americans. Learn when to keep your mouth shut. And remember how good you got it. Because it doesn't always have to be that way in volunteer communities. So, it still had to happen eventually. I remember having a talk with Guido in saying and telling him, I admire how you have managed to delegate control to other people and kind of birth the next generation of Python. That was 10 years ago. Most projects do not outlive their founders. And he has managed through kind of grace and accident to solve that. If I was to guess which one was going to win, it would probably be the Troika proposal, the three-headed monster. Because Python's too big for one person to own all of it.
Can you give a little bit of words what the proposal exactly is?
A BDFL with 3 people, and if I remember correctly, each year one person rotates out. I believe it's like that. And they're voted in by the Python core team, not all of us. It's not pure democracy, it's meritocracy. And with that, they can not only spread the word, but raise the next generation. All of you, for any of you who might be interested in humans as well as software, or I should say humans as well as programmers, pay attention to this and see how this works, to see if the crown can be taken off the head and put onto someone else's head.
Yeah, well, I think the problem that they currently, so basically, these different proposals, they basically propose all possible different ways of steering a project. From one person to another, with everything always. I think one of the big problems that they currently have in taking a decision is that they lost the actual framework that they have for taking a decision, and now they're trying to decide on a new framework for decision taking without having a way to take a decision.
Like building the first compiler.
Indeed.
Yeah. Exactly. So, well, I think that the time frame for that is beginning of next year. They want to have different, like a new setup for decision taking in whatever way that's going to be.
I believe it's the middle of this month.
Yeah.
The vote will finish on which of the 7 or so choices, and then next year they will vote on executing that choice. But you're right, they have the legitimacy thing where they had to first look out the games and how to vote. Does anybody else know anything about what he asked about and have any opinions on?
I think we can go to the next one.
Yeah.
We have a big audience today, so please, more questions. Yes.
Well, I would have a question about type annotation. So I think like that MyPy project, wasn't that also like Guido's pet project or something? And how is that going forward? And actually, how is it like interacting with Thyson or something? Would that be something you could include or something you can infer? Or did include already? Okay, so and if so, is that giving already lots of benefits then? In terms of speed and stuff.
Yeah,
You
so
know,
that was another decision is that had well gave a lot of opposition at the time because adding typing to Python is a change in the language and it's a change in the way the language is seen also. It came from. Still working at Dropbox?
Yeah.
So at Dropbox they had the, what do you call it, problem, they have lots of Python code. Okay?
10 million lines of Python 2 code they had to transfer to Python 3.
Tons and tons of large projects that they all developed in Python. And as in projects of that scale, you come to a point where documentation becomes a problem, where reading really write up what the API is, or tools will have a hard time helping you in using APIs correctly because they are not typed. All the tools really see from a Python's function signature is there's a name, there are arguments which are names, but that's pretty much it. Right? Apart from that, you can pass in anything and either get a type error or a value error, or you get a correct result, or you get a broken result without noticing. Can happen. And so type annotations are a way of documenting these APIs in a machine and human readable way. They make it explicit what the signature is, how the signature is meant and designed. Tools can read that, tools can verify that what you're passing in is the correct type, fits into the contract of the signature. So that is something that helps in larger projects especially. And so at this time, like when he started at Dropbox, Guido came into this situation that lots of developers around him had such a need. And he noticed that, and he started saying that, he started defending the need for type annotations in Python as a language feature. Lots of people didn't like that, because they said, this is not Python anymore, I don't typing in the language, that's not how I want my language to be. Eventually he got through with it, he was the BDFL, like people say, but I want this.
And you don't have to use it, so I mean.
Yes. It's entirely optional, there's nothing that you're forced to use, it's just something that's there to help you.
I would actually say it's something Paul mentioned before. It's the evolution of the language that comes in here. So, as Paul mentioned it right, Python started out with the claim being within the toy languages, the scripting languages. One of the major things that brought me into Python was also the quote from John Kelly, it's about rapid turnaround. So a developer needs a quick way on working and developing things. So it's rapid prototyping, rapidly developing something. So there are different concepts of doing it. Dry, don't repeat yourself, the conventions of a configuration things and so on. Zope actually did a lot of fantastic stuff in the beginning, but it also did a lot of stuff wrong. And the fantastic thing about the Python community is that they learn from the shit they have done. Tim Peters wrote the fantastic Zen of Python. You know, everybody import this in Python. Zen of Python, they are written with Zope in mind. All the shit we've done before in some way are in some way written in there. And what Zope, which was one of the killer applications at that time, Clone was the killer application on top of Zope, is about maintainability and stability. And from there you go to maternity of the code and everything. So being explicit is more important than being quick in the first run, because debugging is extremely hard and takes the time. And as more things you can do as a developer by letting the computer done it for you, like type checking and so on, is a big advantage for you. The thing that is perfect is Python still don't require you to do type checking. It's optional. But if you use it, it can speed up your way of developing and testing the thing so much that it helps you. But you still have the whole flexibility of the duck coupling language in the first place. And that's the thing about why it works without.
One thing I liked you said was debugging is the thing that takes the time. That is actually something that fits very well with Python as a language. So when you write code, usually what you do is you can just sit there stuff and you spell down your code and it looks perfect and it does exactly what you want without even having tested it, right? You haven't even run it, but it looks so perfect, it must do what you want. And then you run it for the first time and it fails, right? And then you're at a point where you have this bunch of code, you've just written it, right? But it failed in an unexpected way, meaning you don't actually understand it the way you've written it. And then now you're in a position where you have to go back to your own code and try to understand it again, but understand it knowing that it does not do what you wanted it to do. And that's where it becomes difficult.
Yeah.
So this is where Python actually shines, because Python has a reputation of being easy to read, right? And when you have a language that is easy to write, but not easy to read, then at the point where you start debugging your own code, you already lost ground, right?
Cool. I want to give my short opinion about regular typing because I like it. I like the idea that you can do that because it helps with tooling also. I mean, if you have, I want my EDE or my IDE to help me. I want my IDE to understand my code better than I do. And the IDE can do that better if it has better tooling like this. So even if you don't use it yourself, there's other projects, for example, PyTest. I hope somebody is working on it at this very moment to add, they are called type checks, which are basically in addition to the actual project, they are stubs that type the whole thing and define the API, and then the IDE can use those type checks and actually help you write your code easier. And I don't know if that's behind it, but PyCharm supports now fixtures, so if you have fixtures, they are like found in a magical way. They're actually there. You don't have to import them, PyTest finds them for you, just ask for them. But you can actually do code completion on them now. And if they're somewhere in your system and PyTest will find them, PyCharm can tell you now, oh, there's this feature by the way you can use here, or this test function expects these kinds of parameterization. And these kinds of things, they are all made easier by this kind of type notation. And the other thing that I think is really important is it's gradual typing, so you can add it in certain places where it makes sense, and in other places you can leave it out. So it's not an all or nothing approach. And the other thing really, it has no runtime consequences at all. It just looks nice. Or not, depending on how much you do. Yeah, that's my...
That's a lot of new info. Thank you.
So one thing you mentioned is that PyCharm supports features now. It's really great. But I asked myself already, or a colleague of mine and me asked, there would be a possibility if I have my own framework, I create my own framework, which does something magical like fixtures, and I could add or I could extend the automatic type annotation which is done by PyCharm in case of fixtures on my own. So a simple example, if I have named tuples, so there is some magic to PyCharm detects the types of detects that this is a type, although there is no class definition. And if I create my own framework which does something simple, similar than named tuples, I have no way to tell PyCharm how to detect the types of this magically created thing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it would be really nice if there would be a kind of plug-in interface or something like that, which I could use as framework creator to tell PyCharm and all kinds of language protocol servers and what else, how to interpret my dynamically created types.
You want templates?
No, not really.
But the example you gave were named tuples.
Yes.
Named tuples are a particularly evil example because internally what they do is they generate code as a string. They evaluate that code, compile it into a Python class, and then return that class. So there's really no way any IDE in the world could predict what comes out of that Python string.
Exactly. So I asked for a interface of PyCharm and MyPy and what else, where I could tell PyCharm how to interpret the string into the types which are come out of the named tuple operation.
One thing recent about in Python 3.7 is a new feature, data classes, which is essentially which is more or less named tuples with types. I think it's even in the pack.
Yeah.
That's that quote.
But also, PyCharm will support data
PyCharm,
classes.
And
But
if I can throw that in
not my.
Atters.
Sorry.
Atters.
Atters.
That's the open source ancestor of it, basically, which is much more powerful than data classes and is supported over all Python versions, not only 3.7. Yeah. So I would look into Atters.
How much have you looked at the expressiveness of the type grading to know whether, apart from the implementation details, if you can describe the shape of what you're describing using some of the more esoteric features, including stuff coming in 3.8, like type decks and things like that?
I think we're going a bit too deep.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I would like to encourage questions from all directions. Don't be shy.
Yeah.
Ask simple questions. Ask, can I build a website with PyMunich? Or something. It's not an experts exchange session. They know each other already. They can talk to each other. It's about the exchange between this side and this side. So ask questions that are relevant for everyone, and let's try not to go too deep into one topic to have more, coverage of
coming for a
wider variety. Yeah. So please, next one over there.
Yeah, I hope it's very simple and stupid questions. I know that one of the model of Python is you can do a thing in only one way, or at least you should do this. And I know that you can transform your array, for instance, in a few different ways. You can use map function with some lambda code probably. Or you can use array comprehension. So what do you think about this? Why Python supports a few different ways to do one thing?
Although there should be one, and preferably only one way to do it.
I have a very strong opinion about that.
Well, I said it before already where it comes from. Actually, the quote in the Son of Python comes from Zoe because we have done exactly the same thing, I think, 20 times in different ways, calculating the same result. And you could not, on moving from one model to the other, know which kind is used and which will the other error or something like that. So it's the thing about programming. If you want to reach a point, you either have a standard library that gives you an agnostic way to get the result of it, or you have thousands of different implementations getting to the same point.
Which we have.
You will always have. Telling a developer, there is already a tool for it. It's like telling a songwriter there's a song about love already. They still will write a new tool about that. There is not always a unique thing unless it is in the standard library.
Yeah, that's basically what I wanted to say. What my strong opinion is. You're completely right. There are different ways of doing it. But the example you use, for example, it should be very obvious that that's not the way you do that anymore. But there is a progression. There is growth. There is, call it innovation, whatever. We have 3 different ways of formatting strings now. And the only true way is obviously F strings.
Yeah.
And F strings was also something that was highly discussed and debated and whatever. And people said, oh, Python will die because of this. And now everybody loves F strings. So I mean, there is a progression, and you can't just get rid of the old stuff because you need to be backwards compatible to a certain extent. But that's why we have the deprecation cycles, and at some point then Python will politely tell you, if you do this in 3.8, by the way, it will explode. And so that's a natural progression. And actually, the Zen of Python is kind of a joke. So I Python. So it's something that is grounded in philosophical ideas that make a lot of sense, but you can't take everything of it like written in stone. I mean, this thing actually ends with there should be one obvious way to do it. And unless you're Dutch or something, I mean, it's the whole thing. It already makes the
I'm
fun
Dutch.
itself.
Wasn't you the boss of Tim Peters by that time? You know the background of the second time.
It's funny that new style classes were in what, 2000?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it was, you had to inherit from object in Python 2, and now you don't inherit from object anymore in Python 3, so that's
Yeah.
like, and you, obviously, if you come to a new language and all this stuff flies, that you all this 30 years of history, you have to wade your way through and find out, okay, what's the way how to do things now? And I come back to my pet peeve now, open source. The way to look how are things done now are usually happening in open source projects because they're usually spearheading the development. And if you are in a highly popular open source projects that a lot of developers are in, there's a lot of people with very strong opinions, and you can't just put any kind of code in there, although it happens. But there, if you want to look how do you do things right, whatever that means, by any definition of right, look into popular open source systems, read the code, and be amazed of what's possible. If you want to read something really nice, for example, read the assertion rewrite part in PyTest. The assertion rewrite, if you want to be scared.
For one thing, maybe the async, why it's not maybe not a good example, like the async, how you use async.io API. It has progressed in the last 3 versions. So, and if you now look at all kinds of frameworks, Stack Overflow, and we'll all give examples of how you not currently, we think in Python 3.7, should not use it. Just use the high-level API, async.io.run, and not do magic stuff with the environment. So that's my take on it. It doesn't count for async.io, doesn't look into libraries, just only use the high-level API of the documentation.
That reminds me of one thing that makes projects successful. It's because the core developers don't take things personal if someone comes up and say, things you're doing is awesome, but you might be wrong at that point, because they take criticism positive, learn from others, and don't take, I'm the rock star. I'm always doing it right. They're learning from each other, and successful projects evolve by the time, getting new people in, getting the new opinions, and even we old people here, learning from each other, learning from the new people, getting some new ideas in. And you see the successful people are those ones that are open-minded. And that's the important thing on that.
I have a funny story about that. I also have some funny stories. And sometimes out of this there comes, I don't know if I want to call it innovation, but just that we're talking about S-strings. I opened the pull request on Tox at some point, and I was at that point I just liked the old school string formatting thing for simple things. And then somebody told me, I think it was Werner, let's do dot format everywhere because that's cleaner and it's the way to do it nowadays. And as I'm old, I thought no, that's not. If I don't have S strings, I said at the end of the discussions, I don't care. I just use the old stuff because format is too strange for me because I never really use that. There are footfalls. You shouldn't use it better if you don't really, because if you have a tuple, for example, and you use the formatting string, then it can crash because then it tries to unpack the tuple in one person S and things like that. So format is cleaner and better. And I said in the end, yeah, okay, let's do that. But I wish I could use S strings already in versions smaller than 3.6. Literally, 2 or 3 hours later, Anthony sorted it, opened or wrote something in there. By the way, I just wrote this project called Future S strings, which is using the encoding system, so you can do this encoding at the beginning of the line where you say this is UTF-8. Well, he created an encoding which is called Future F string, I think, and hooks himself then into the import mechanism, which is easy in Python, and just takes all the, if you use .format, it's actually quite easy to rewrite that into F strings. So it just transforms the source code from format strings into F strings, or the other way around, you know, F strings to format strings, and bam, you can have you can have F strings, Python 2 or whatever. So out of these discussions, you know, these grumpy old men then discuss with others, and somebody comes up with a good idea and brings something. I mean, it's meant as a joke, but you know, the Zen Python was meant as a joke. I'm pretty sure it's running in some production systems already as we speak.
And F strings and all the things about the formatting of string is actually a pretty good example on evolution and some of the pitfalls you can have in a language. So, did everybody of you know how formatting involved in the Python ecosystem? So in the beginning, it was like a string where you have percentage and then a letter that indicates which type of input you get.
C-style formatting.
C-style formatting. Then you have the format method that formats you and now have strings. I've rewritten restricted Python, which actually it was like digging in the software archaeology. I found that comments that go back to Python 0 dot something in the code, so yeah. F strings actually did have an AST model behind it, so it was actually from the security model not only ways ahead, it's light years ahead.
Just a second. Who knows what is F string right there? All right, not bad. Yeah.
But there's only one except where F string is not the good thing, and that's on logging.
Yeah,
Because logging is still the only one where you should use the old style formatting because
No, you should use commas. If you use old style formatting,
yeah, you need the commas,
you have
but
your formatting string, and then you have the
because otherwise it's always executed on the runtime, and this way it's only executed if
Totally
the
understandable, but it's weird and it's
Yeah.
unnatural.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Let's move on. Next one, please.
I have a question regarding server-side templating or REST web servers. Which approach to use and when? Like, it could be possible to create a template on server side, and before sending a page to a client, we can fill the template and send to the client. Or we can give a REST, and then client does the job. What, in your opinion, is better, when, and why?
I have no opinion about this. I'm not that well.
Go ahead first.
The world has changed. And we're wrong. In this new world of React-style virtual DOM dipping interfaces, the universe is way different than we think, and rendering a template to a string in an HTML response is not going to cut it anymore. And we have a lot of room to do. Even REST isn't. Sorry.
That's a person.
REST is closer.
The fundamentals for REST and everything, yeah. Well, I do have an opinion on that, and in the old days, we do everything server side.
Yeah.
Server side is still, from my point of view, the thing for the business logic. But everything that is a user interface needs a rapid turnaround. That's where the client side gets involved. Everything where you need security, checking and everything needs to be also be done on the server side. But everything you can do on the client, do on the client. REST and everything that goes behind that is the way to go. And the reason why is very simple, because CPU and calculation time is extremely cheap today. Your cell phone today has more calculation power than all the supercomputers bring in to be managed into the moon.
And emerging countries don't have 47G networks yet. Next question. I saw some hands up.
Yes? You?
Sure. So one of the things that I've struggled more with in Python than in most other languages that I use is software versioning. And one of the things that typically breaks me, like, yeah, right, exactly. Like the interesting places that I've been is like, usually like at some point or for quite some time it worked out reasonably well to reuse requirements files, and I should add that I sometimes just dig up some software that I wrote like 5 years ago and I want to rerun it. And that for quite some time that worked. Then at some point I think a lot of things broke because I think cryptography uses OpenSSL beneath the sheets, and they made an API breaking change and all hell was loose, and a lot of shit didn't run anymore. It took a very long time to fix it. And so what I've boiled down to in most cases is I make a Docker container. I just take stuff from the operating system and definitely not from pip. And if it works in one version for an operating system that has a stable release model, it will work, which has all the downsides of not being able to use pip, but has the upside that my software runs after 5 years, which in that case isn't Docker anymore, but it's like, there's some old style stuff, like I have virtual machine images lying around that still hold like these 5 Python programs with these virtual envs, simply because otherwise I know, like I've tried to set them up again in a Docker container and I couldn't figure a pip configuration that worked and compiled. And this is also not something that is like, it doesn't seem to be something that gets better. Like one of the most recent things that I tried to do via pip is to set up OpenAI Gym. And of course, one of its dependencies didn't compile.
You're using a lot of C extension heavy software, aren't you? Because then in the pure Python world, this is actually not really...
You are using in the sense of an open source library has a requirements file that uses libraries that.
For example, XML.
And I mean, like, the reality of Python is, if you do any of the data science stuff, which a lot of the nice Python stuff is today, you want a C or C++ backend because it's going to be really slow.
Better because you said you had more problems in Python than other languages. Which languages are doing better? Which languages can we learn from?
So not specifically languages, because there are very few languages that have like a good packaging toolchain.
That's probably is everywhere, I think.
Yeah, one of the better ones is the one in Rust, but they're also reasonably young, and like they had the advantage of not having this 2 to 3 transition and all of this crap lying around. And they designed the language with interoperability. Yeah, exactly. That's my point here.
One of the problems of pip is that it's basically application level.
Yeah.
So it installs dependencies of your application, but it cannot take care of system dependencies or external native libraries or whatever. So some Python projects go to the extent of packaging native libraries as part of some of the source distribution, or at least they're in binary distribution. So wheels often have everything statically linked in. Well, often, maybe not often, but sometimes. There are different ways to do that. The general problem is really pip does not care about system dependencies. So if, even if your whole requirements text file lists exactly all versions of all dependencies and transitive dependencies of your dependencies, even then you're not, you can't be sure that you will have, like the pip install in your project will exactly replicate what you originally tested. Because the system library might simply have different version, might be newer, might not allow the system to compile at all. That's a big problem. Definitely. I'm well aware of that.
Yeah, right, that's what I'm asking. So what do you do? Like the solution, that one of the things that you can do is you have a system library that you can easily build yourself, like the ports collection for FreeBSD, for example. or you use a package management system like Nix, which is complex.
This is hurting my brain.
Yes, and pip is much easier, but it just breaks. And it's like,
Well, that is built out.
easy and breaks is like, of course, complex instead of breaks.
Well, Stefan mentioned build out, which actually, Paul, you can correct me, it's older than virtual environment and everything like that. Actually, the problem in Python, and that's also one of the learning curves we did have, is packaging is extremely hard, and we didn't find the solution that actually helps everyone. Build out was one of the first things that tried to pin everything and make Zope repeatable, build the same way with all the version dependencies and so on. What we faced pretty much obviously, Martin has maybe called it the Überbuild out. The people started to build the system dependency with build
Python, put it in the middle.
we have setup tools, we have virtual environments, we have pip, we have PyEnv and everything. There are so many things, PyTormo, everything try to solve and go a bit further, but none of them has solved it totally. Actually, actually, the thing from my point of view is it's a problem you can't solve by the thing itself. There's one thing that helps you going with it, and that's going for make the software specification and test against the software specification in your software. Because if there's changing something, you pretty much see what you have to change so that it runs still on new versions or new dependencies. So make it testable and go beyond the test coverage of 100%. Go for type annotations, go for readable code and everything. So you cannot get a software 100% so that it runs in every version, but you can get a software at a point where you can adopt the software to new versions and new dependency versions within hours, then within years. And we have seen it from a discussion, I think we have, we know each other from 2013, Brazil, where we started a discussion about clone on Python 3, which happened last month.
Oh, is it released?
Yeah.
Somebody told me it's going to be released next month, 2 years ago.
It's released now.
I think it's time for the next topic.
So, yeah.
I have a proposal. We have 10 minutes to 10, and I think staying after 10 is a bit insane. JetBrains will never invite us again. So let's close this at 10. This means we have 10 minutes left, and we will try to fit 2 questions at least in these 5 minutes. Yeah, please.
Yes, I have an impression that all the languages are going in the same direction now, or probably the way before. Like this F formatting strings in Python, we have pretty much the same in years 2017, I don't know, in JavaScript. This async await syntax, I don't know, all of the languages are going in a functional direction. Probably it's not true, but this is my opinion. Like Python has a lot of iter tools, things, and partial and whatever, and Java has Scala that goes in functional direction. So is it true that all languages are trying to consolidate their approaches somehow and go in the same, literally the same direction somehow? Do you feel it? Do you feel the same, or it's not true?
I think it's a lot about pragmatism. Being pragmatic as a language, allowing people to apply concepts that they've already learned probably somewhere else in a similar way through some language. Some of these concepts that you mentioned are relatively new, came up a couple of years ago maybe. I mean, async is hugely old, but the way we're doing it today is probably not exactly like we were doing it 40 years ago, I guess. most of the languages that we use today have open source implementations. So people who see things appearing somewhere else are in a position these days to implement themselves in their own environment. So like Ruby, Perl, Python, C compilers, all of these are open source these days. I mean, there are closed source implementations, there's Intel compiler something, Microsoft compiler something, but there's GCC, right? And it's like, it's no longer a barrier where languages themselves are closed. And that's why things are like coming together much easier these days.
But about the feeling that Python is going functional, Python, a lot will have to happen before Python stops being fundamentally an object-oriented language. It's not an object-oriented language, it's an object-based language. Everything in Python is an object. Everything that is assigned to a name is an object that has attributes and methods and whatever. So it's an object language in the core. And all the stuff that grows on top that looks maybe like functional or looks like this or looks like that, but the way how it's implemented, it's an object-oriented language. You can write in many paradigms with it.
Well, actually, you do have different programming paradigms, and all of them are valid because all of them solving a certain problem. The thing is that languages tend to implement new language features to allow you doing more stuff is because people are boring and people are lazy. They want to do the stuff they need to solve by the thing or with help by the things they already know. The problem is, the more language features a language adopts, the more complicated it could become, and the more step the learning curve becomes. So Python is about readability and approachability of the language, and it is all about object-oriented or object-based programming with functional aspects. But there are logical-based, there are imperative-based models, there are other programming styles that will never become a language feature of Python, and it's a good thing because it would make the language more complex and unapproachable for others. So there is actually for computer scientists a thing that they should know different programming languages and different programming concepts and say, I have to solve that problem, and for that problem maybe Python is the good language, for that is Haskell, for that is Erlang or something else, the better solution. And yeah, the problem is the people try to solve the problems by the things they already know. And it's like the hammer and the nail or the screw problem. If you have a screw and a hammer, everything looks like a nail for you.
Python is the second best programming language for everything.
Yeah, indeed.
All right, I think that's good. We can have one more question, preferably from somebody who did not ask questions yet. Anyone? Yes, please.
If you could change somehow magically something about the language in general, what would it be?
That's a good one. Also a difficult one. Very opinionated one, I suppose.
10 by 10, I think.
I'm going to think over this over the next year. Where are we going? Good question.
Would you kill off Python 2, for example?
We are doing that right now. Yeah. Did you see the Python clock? 1 year and a bit more than a month left, and it's dead.
Okay.
There's going to be a big party on Python.
Nice.
Every single thing related to setup tools, wheels, eggs, and virtual environments.
Oh, really? Okay.
What's the answer to wheels then? But maybe we can discuss it in the rehearsal.
was really thinking more like on the syntax level, like the language, because I actually like most of it.
Oh, that's nice. Very patriotic. Okay, so yes, Wills, you?
Built-in functions. I'm working a lot with some of the internals of Python, and actually for some of the things, for me, it's weird that you have such a fantastic standard library, and there are built-in functions that came out of nowhere and are not explainable to you.
You mean like all and any and
Yeah.
all this stuff?
Good point.
How would you do that differently?
From
legends
legends or something.
If you work from built-in support all.
Or something. Yeah. Something
And you
like
can
that.
actually,
Predictable.
delete the buildings model, I'm sure, that you don't have them
And
anymore.
you actually do it at restrict Python. Yeah.
And we even have time for one more question, I guess. So please, the final one. Yes.
Okay. Would you recommend to better use Flake 8 or PyLint or both?
Good point. Linters.
Hard question. Pre-commit lots of stuff. I like Flake 8. It's simple. It wraps a few tools. It's not just linting. It's doing this make complexity measurement also, which means that if one of your colleagues writes a function that is 1,000 lines long and has lots of everything else in it, then the make complexity is too high, and then you have to modularize the code more. That is quite helpful. Unless you set the make complexity higher in the configuration file, then that doesn't help either. If you did, we never went over 23. So Flake 8 is a compiler, but and that wraps PyCode style, which used to be at 8. So that I would call that my favorite linting tool. But try them out. You see for yourself.
I think we're using both, but
Yeah.
I see that as
I'm not both. That's not good. Another approach.
I would go the other way. There's one thing, and that's about code style. That's where Black actually going in, making it. But linting is about giving the developer a feedback. And I would always say, don't use one linting tool, use different ones to get different feedbacks. If you're doing something that might has an affection for you, you can learn from the feedback. The compiler is so quick and can give you the feedback that there might be a problem by the different implementations of linting. So if you have Flake 8, PyLint, PyLlama, and all the other stuff, use it. Tox or other tools are fantastic, giving you that by pre-commit or a save action or something, giving you the feedback. But still,
They have two
one.
I mean, usually, because I use Python inspections as like my first line of defense, and then I have something like Flake 8, and they might disagree with each other.
Yeah.
If I now introduce more, they might disagree with each other all the time. And they go again.
For me, the two most.
Run out of time. Your answer.
What?
No, just
Yeah.
language change.
Well, language change.
Oh no, sorry.
Yeah, I would actually change the way all these tools are set up because they're also difficult, and get a linter to run and to link in the way I want. I actually never got there. It's just there's so many options.
Yes, AutoPad 8. AutoPad 8 is trying to lint it automatically change the code that it applies to Pad 8. Try that.
Something like Go Forward, which is not sure if you are aware of that.
It's like Black on steroids.
Yeah.
With and very integrated, yeah. So it might break the code.
But there's also Koala.
Yeah, that's language agnostic and nice people behind it.
Yeah.
They're pretty busy.
Yeah. And it can also clean up your show.
Already said for you.
Was it an alarm?
I will say one last thing, because we have one fantastic organizer here, so give Anton
Thank you.
and then
I was just connecting people together. But thanks for appreciating this. I think we owe a big applause to our experts, speakers, and jet brains. Let's do that. much.
Just
I
one
hope
more
to see you
question.
around. Yes?
One comment. Please, there's a tablet that is moving around for our newsletter. Please don't forget to sign it.
Take a look at our conference. Yeah. Whose laptop was this one?
Was that your laptop?
Bye. End of the live stream.
I gave him his.
Yeah, I found it. It
Okay.
was there. Yes. All right. That's it. Finita.
The way I got to Python make you cry, because it was like a colleague